Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Shruti, and today I'm presenting my findings from a mixed method study titled Designing an Effective EFL Course for Young Learners Aged 7 to 9. At the core of this research, the aim was to address one central challenge, which is how do we bridge the gap between a child's natural cognitive development, the process of language learning, and the kind of interactive teaching that actually supports both of these things. Okay, sorry about that. The objective of this study was to develop a 10-week EFL course specifically tailored for Omani children between the ages of 7 and 9. The focus was on tackling three persistent issues. One being literacy gaps, the second one being low motivation, and the third one being somewhat outdated teaching strategies. Now, I've been a teacher for a long time, and all my years, one problem that kept coming up over and over again is low literacy rates in English in Oman, and this study is an attempt to remedy that. To design this course, I used a combination of needs analysis, diagnostic assessments, and learner evaluations. There were also discussions with key stakeholders about the benefits from this course, attitudes of the learners, as well as discussions with other teachers in feedback loops. What really stood out for me in this process was how much students improved when learning became hands-on and interactive, as opposed to the more passive methods we often see in classrooms. Now, this is not to say that passive activities don't have their own benefits or cannot be used well in a classroom, but for younger children, it is important to also balance that with more hands-on activities. This experience reinforced for me the power of grounding our instruction in solid theory. In particular, Piaget and Vygotsky were key influences in this research project. To put it quite simply, if we take Piaget's constructivist approach seriously, then our classrooms must become environments where students can build knowledge through active engagement by doing things or exploring their environment or interacting with the language and their environment. While this kind of teaching is, of course, becoming more prevalent, there are quite a few schools and classroom environments that rely quite heavily on more passive learning methods. Now, I want to zoom out here for a moment and just look at the bigger picture. English has been a required subject in Oman since the late 1990s. But in 2024, the country ranked 104th out of 116 in the EF English Proficiency Index. That puts Oman in the very low proficiency band in a global context. When we look at classrooms a little bit more closely, the reasons for this kind of ranking becomes a bit clearer. Many teachers, unfortunately, still rely quite heavily on textbook-based, teacher-centered instructions with very limited opportunities for exploratory, child-led learning. Culturally, this preference for teacher-led pedagogy is quite strong, but the issue is that children aged 7 to 9, they need more than passive listening. They need to be learning in a way, in a style that actually meets them at their developmental stage. So what this reveals is that there is a major gap between educational policy and what is actually happening in practice. One of the most recurring patterns I found was how many students across various settings associated English with fear, embarrassment, or low confidence. This is where Vygotsky's zone of proximal development becomes really relevant. It reminds us that students need scaffolded support, both emotional and cognitive, in order to take risks and grow. When this is implemented in a thoughtful manner, the ZPD framework can help learners feel safe enough to experiment with language. And that safety is what allows them to build meaningful understanding, which again ties back to Piaget's constructivism. So this course was built around these key theories in education. I've already very briefly talked about Piaget and Vygotsky, but I also drew from the self-determination theory, which focuses on helping learners develop autonomy, competence, and connection. Now, autonomy is a bit of a challenging concept here. It is challenging with the age group that I'm looking for, but also in my context, in Oman, it can often be associated with laziness or lack of effort on the part of the teacher. So, educating key stakeholders is also essential if this style of teaching is to gain much traction, especially in my context. Teaching young learners to take ownership of their learning helps them with tasks that are challenging because motivation is not coming from the teacher, it is coming from within. One approach that brings all these ideas together is project-based learning. It allows for collaboration, creativity, and purpose, all within a structure that supports developmental and academic goals. So the curriculum itself followed a spiral progression model. What this means that is that core concepts were revisited repeatedly. But each time the concept was revisited, there was a little bit more complexity that was added in. Um, there was also a chance for us to integrate cross-curricular themes, such as blending English with science or math, which allowed for more engagement across different classrooms for different learners with different preferences and all of that. Um, A typical lesson might begin with a story that activates students' prior knowledge, followed by a brief input session and then a hands-on task where students get to apply what they have just learned. Now, this was followed by probably the next day or the next lesson where there will be more input, but with a higher level of complexity. And this was followed by another chance for students to then apply what they had learned. This back and forth between exposure and experimentation was a key design feature. During the pilot phase, we implemented the course with different teachers in different classrooms. We used teacher journals, student feedback, classroom observations, and Cambridge diagnostic tests, as well as focus groups with key stakeholders to continuously evaluate and refine the course. Now, what was particularly special about this course design was that students were also able to evaluate the course by using simple evaluation methods like a sticker chart, for example. Now, this gave the teachers on this project insight about how the students were finding the course rather than solely depending on the adults who were conducting this program. Performance-wise, at the beginning, listening and speaking came out strong. Around 75% of learners followed instructions well and participated enthusiastically. Now, this is the common pattern, but what was difficult for the learners, again, which is quite common, is reading comprehension, especially inferencing, which was a big challenge. Only 34% of students could answer inferencing questions accurately. Writing also showed signs of struggle, especially with grammar and sentence structure. These insights helped us refine the curriculum and emphasize those weaker areas. The impact of the revised student-centered curriculum was quite significant. We saw a 32% improvement in decoding accuracy, especially around vowel patterns. Voluntary speaking, where students were choosing to speak in English without being prompted, without being asked a question, increased by 40%. And maybe the most telling, nearly 88% of parents said that their children became more confident using English. Now, while this research highlights the benefit of a course like this, it is important to be realistic and to take this whole process with a pinch of salt. This course was effective as demonstrated here, but it is probably more feasible to implement courses like this first in language centers where there's more flexibility and smaller class sizes, and the curriculum is not so heavily centered around a textbook. In schools, Teacher training is going to be a key factor if this kind of teaching is to become popular and if teachers are supposed to be comfortable with this method of teaching. A strong train the trainer model will be essential to build teacher confidence and capability. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I hope that the takeaway from this study is that when we observe our learners and listen to their concerns, and when we are able to blend theory and context-aware practice, we can transform the language learning experience and equip young children with the skills they need to develop EFL proficiency. I would love to hear your thoughts or questions or feedback, if any. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.